Hi, welcome to your Strategic Dining Services online video training. Today we're going to take you through the steps of making basic bread and the process to produce breads in your communities for your residents, for sales and marketing events, and for special events. So in preparing these fresh breads, we're talking about just 4 basic ingredients: flour, salt, yeast, water. One of the things I wanted to talk about is the yeast. We're using a fresh yeast for this process. The fresh yeast is used primarily because of its ease. It does not need to be steeped in warm water or reconstituted as dry active yeast would be, so it kind of saves you steps. And also it's very accurate in its consistency of how much yeast goes in the bread. So you can order this generally through your broadliner or your local dairy provider. The yeast comes in a 1-pound block, similar to a butter print. Comes wrapped like this, and the texture is that of about feta cheese. And it comes crumbled, and you can just weigh that out as you need it. You keep it refrigerated, and it'll last in your refrigerator for a couple weeks. In your basic bread making, there's 6 steps that we use to produce a basic dough. And those are scaling the ingredients, mixing the ingredients, fermentation process, dividing and shaping the dough, proofing and scoring, and then finally baking. So as we go through this video, we're going to take you through each of those steps and the intricacies of producing bread with those steps in mind. So the first one is scaling your ingredients, and the best point I can make here is we want to make sure that we weigh all of our ingredients. We're not going to measure them by volume using a measuring cup or a measuring spoon. By measuring them by weight, it's a much more accurate way to measure your ingredients. The next step in this bread baking process is mixing the dough. So we have here a recipe that makes about 7 to 8 pounds of dough. Start with about 5 pounds of flour, 2 ounces of yeast, about 2.5 ounces of salt, and 3 pounds of water. So the first thing we're going to do is start with the water. And the reason is in this bread baking process, we never want to add additional flour to our dough. So we want to start with just cut back on the water just a little bit. Next, we're going to add the flour, and we can add all the flour. And we're going to add the fresh yeast. Again, this fresh yeast does not need to be reactivated. It can go straight in the bowl. And the salt. We're going to close up the mixer. And we're going to start on the lowest speed for about 1.5 minutes. And basically all we're doing here is pulling the flour into the water and starting the mixing process. We don't want to start on a higher speed so the flour doesn't come out of the mixing bowl. So this will only take about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. Okay, after about 1.5 minutes, just so the ingredients have combined, we're going to turn the mixer up to a medium speed and mix it for only about 7 to 8 more minutes. Now this process is the first step in kneading the dough. Okay, after about 7 to 9 minutes, the dough has come together and has been kneaded gently. So we're going to stop that and we're going to go right on to the next step, which is the fermentation process. So we're going to remove this from the mixer. And the dough is going to go into a plastic container or a bucket for overnight fermentation. All right. Now notice that this fermentation process is going to be done in the refrigerator overnight to develop some flavor. So we're going to cover this tightly. And notice the bin is a little large for the amount of dough, and that's because this dough will about triple in size overnight. So we want to make sure that when we do cover this, that we cover it very tightly so the dough doesn't expand and come out of the bucket overnight. So this was the first day of production, and as you can see, once you get really good at this process of scaling the dough, mixing the dough, and starting the fermentation process, it should only take 10 to 15 minutes to do these couple steps the first day. And you're done for the day, put it in the refrigerator and come back the next day, and we'll take it from there. All right, so we've allowed the dough to ferment overnight. We've pulled it out. We're going to move on to the next step, which is dividing and shaping the dough. I did want to make a note that the cool thing about allowing this dough to ferment in the refrigerator overnight is we've eliminated the need to spend a lot of time kneading the dough, to work the dough. That's been done over that fermentation process. So now one note is we allowed this dough to ferment overnight for only about 24 hours. If you can't get to the dough, it's perfectly fine to sit in your refrigerator for an extra day. If you still can't get to it, it's a perfect time to take that dough, divide it out into a reasonable size, and go ahead and throw it in the freezer. Freeze is perfect, and you can use it at a later date. So, shaping and dividing the dough. So we've taken this fermented dough, which has fermented overnight. We're going to lay it out onto a clean surface, just lightly dusted. Now, one thing I'd like for you to notice is just how wet this dough is. It's not a real dry lump, even while it's cold. It still has a lot of flexibility, and is a little wet to the touch, which is perfect. So we're going to show you two basic steps, or two basic shapes. One is a baguette, and one is a boule, which is a basic round. So as we discussed, the following step is dividing the dough first. And dividing the dough is taking the dough and cutting it into sizes that you would like your final loaf to be. So I'm cutting a couple of these into about a pound and a half size pieces of dough. And we'll start from there. Now again, this is a perfect time to take this leftover dough, throw it in the freezer, and a few days later you pull that out and continue to bake bread throughout the week. All right, the first shape that I'm going to show you is just a simple boule, which is basically means ball or round. And this is a very easy shape, just lightly flour. Again, don't over flour your surface. Basically, you're going to start by just pulling that dough under into the center of the underside of the dough. And we're just going to keep pulling that so that we allow the top surface to be nice and stretched. If you want, if you're making dinner rolls, you would make this the same way and you would just roll those on the surface. And again, pulling that top under itself to create a nice flat surface. Once you form that up, that's it. Throw it on your sheet pan. Again, start with just a basic shape. Once you've got that basic shape, give it a quick roll. Once you have a nice smooth surface on top, you lay that right on the sheet pan. And that's your basic boule. The next shape I'm going to show you is a simple baguette. And basically we're going to start with the dough. We're going to try to make a rectangle, depending on the size of your dough, maybe just a few inches by a few inches. We're going to form that into a basic rectangle. And that's your start. Again, don't over flour your surface. You notice I don't have a ton of flour here. Now one thing, when you're working with this dough, you don't want to do a lot of pressing of the dough. What that does is pulls the air out of the dough and will make it for a dense dough. So don't over press it. And to form a baguette, we want to stretch that out a little bit. The first thing you want to do is to fold that triangle into thirds. So fold down your first side and then fold over your second side. And that'll create the basic baguette shape. Then you could press that out a little bit. If you want, you can just roll it to the shape that you want, starting from the middle and working your way out. Or you can actually bring that seam to the top and you can tuck the dough using your thumb and pulling it over itself. And depending on the size of your baguette, you can keep working the dough until you get the basic size and shape that you're looking for. For a baguette this size of finished product, you'll need to work the dough to about this size here. And the reason is this dough, once it goes into the proofing stage, is going to about double in size. So once that shape is done, you can throw that onto a sheet pan and you're ready to go. Now once you have some basic shapes done, and again, if you wanted to take a little piece of dough and just do a dinner roll, you could again tuck that under itself like we did before and give it a quick roll. And there you have about 3 different shapes: a dinner roll, a baguette, and a basic boule. Okay, at this point you've got your bread shapes done, and if you wanted to take and put some details on these breads like scoring or flavoring, now's the perfect time. To do some scoring, like for the baguette, you would just make simple cuts about 3/4 of the way down through the bread. Or if you wanted to make an unusual shape on your boule, you might score it like so. And then if you wanted to flavor your bread, which the flavor combinations are almost endless, it's a very simple process. The best thing to do is just to take a wet towel that's been soaked in a good amount of water, take your shaped dough, dab it on the water, seasoning this in a little poppy seed. And again, the ingredients that you would like to use are pretty much endless. You could use sesame seeds, rye seeds, fennel seeds, just about anything. And at this point, the breads are ready to go into a warm spot to proof. We want to make sure that they double in size, and usually in an ideal setting, this takes around 45 minutes to an hour. All right, we've allowed these breads to proof. Again, what we're looking for is these doughs to double in size. Usually takes about 45 minutes to an hour. Once they've doubled in size, they're ready to go in the oven. I have an oven set here for at about 375 degrees Fahrenheit. The breads go in. And depending on the size of the loaves, they could take anywhere from a dinner roll, may take anywhere from 25 minutes to 30 minutes. A large boule or a baguette could take up to 50 minutes to bake. Really depends on the size you have. Once completed, you're going to end up with a nice selection of breads, fresh baked. And I want to stress just how easy this process was. We started the first day with only about 15 minutes of work, scaling out the ingredients, mixing and allowing it to ferment overnight, not a lot of excessive kneading. The next day we came in, we divided it, shaped it, allowed it to proof, and baked. Again, only about 15 minutes of production the second day. Total of about 30 minutes of production to produce fresh baked breads for your residents, guests, and sales and marketing events. So have fun with it. I look forward to seeing you in your next training video. I'm Jeff Kelly. Thanks.